In 1889, Copper King W.A. Clark and 74 other men wrote a state constitution to serve the needs of Montana's powerful interests, with a weak governor, a secretive legislature, and special tax deals for the powerful. After 60 years under the copper collar, Montana was declared the nearest thing to a colony of any American state. The Anaconda Mining Company even owned most Montana newspapers, the Copper Press. The corporate dominance of Montana's political affairs was unique in American history. 70 years after statehood, the Copper Press was finally sold, and thousands of World War II veterans had been educated under the GI Bill. Newly enlightened Montanans wanted out from under the copper collar, and big winds of change roared across the Treasure State. Changing Montana's constitution was the top priority. Strengthening the governorship, opening up the legislature, empowering citizens. Voices of Montana women, totally silenced in 1889, rang out loud and clear for these changes. When the Constitutional Convention began, 19 women were among the elected delegates. And when the delegates came together in convention, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, men and women, young and old, sat alphabetically as equals, Montanans just wanting to make their state better. And so they did, producing a constitution for the ages, the last best constitution. Now, at its 50th anniversary, Evan Barrett and real history makers of the time shine a light on the creation of this remarkable Montana Constitution.
Welcome back to Last Best Constitution. We're sitting here filming in the studios with the delegates and folks who worked on the Montana Constitution back in 1972. That was 50 years ago, and in fact, we're having a big celebration in Montana celebrating the 50th anniversary of the convention itself and the wonderful Constitution that emerged from that convention. Arguably, by many scholars and practitioners, the best state constitution in the nation. And we wanted to celebrate that this year, and one way to do it was to acquaint you with the people who put the convention together, put the Constitution together, a little bit about them. What made up that Constitution and why did it happen? And our guest today is Marshall Murray. Marshall was a delegate from Flathead County. It was they had multi-member districts, so to speak, back there, and a group of delegates came down from the Flathead. Marshall was one of them, and he played some very important roles in this Constitution. He was on the Bill of Rights Committee. Perhaps even more important than doing that, as important as that is, was the Rules Committee. How do you operate the convention? How did it all happen? And he was able to do that. Marshall is with us, and we'll enjoy this, and I hope you enjoy this segment. Marshall, welcome to Last Best Constitution.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, it's really great to have you here and to have you back in Montana. I know you're out with family on the West Coast now.
That's right, Oregon.
But the mountains of and the lakes around Flathead County, I bet you miss them.
Well, I do, but I have many mountains out in Oregon, started with Hood.
Yeah. Now, you were an attorney, and still are.
I am.
And so...
I'm not practicing, no.
Yeah. And you don't have to pay the dues that way, do you?
Well, they canceled me.
Your background, you were elected in Kalispell.
Yes.
But you're a native of Eureka. Tell us a little about your upbringing.
Well, I was bred and born in Eureka to Marshall Sr. and Mary Ruth Hamilton. And Dad was the first full-time attorney in Eureka, and eventually got to be county attorney, and then we moved to Libby. And then I lost my mother at age 5, and Dad eventually in 1941 went to a law firm in Kalispell with a former football player of his from the Montana Grizzlies, and stayed there ever since until he died. He died 2 days before my 21st birthday.
And so you went to school in, like high school in Kalispell?
Yeah, grade school between Libby, back to Eureka with Grandma, and then back to Libby to the 3rd grade, and then over to Kalispell in the 4th grade.
And stayed there. And so when you graduated, you headed to UM, did you? Or where'd you go?
Well, I
college?
went to the University of Montana
Right.
after I graduated from Flathead County High School. And went through, I was one of the first, maybe there only was one, I don't know, they didn't have it later, but I was, usually if you had meritorious grades, you were able to get into law school in 3 years, although recommended that you had a degree before you went into law school was 3 years. Well, they started a program that I was involved in, and I don't know if they continued after we got through 2 years, and if you had outstanding grades, then you were able to get into law school. It was 4 years, but they mixed the 3-year credit with a few credits that you had from regular school.
So you got to go through, instead of a 4-year plus 3, it became less, fewer years.
Yeah, 6 years total.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was good. And then you had the diploma privilege back then too, right?
Oh yes, by that you mean admitted to practice by the Supreme Court.
Right.
But let me tell you what, it was a little bit difficult. Because in the 2 classes that I was in, the freshman class and then the next class that came in, because I was part of both, one of them started out with nearly 40 and another one 35, and I think one class, I don't remember which it was only 15 made it, and the other class only 13 made it. So the duty by the Supreme Court to the professors at the law school was, you tell us who's able to be a good lawyer, and we will, based on your recommendation, we will give them diploma privilege and allow them to practice.
Okay, so it wasn't automatic then.
Oh no,
Yeah,
no, it was very difficult.
Yeah. I was around when they changed that, when Jim Getz had that lawsuit to change that.
Yeah.
But in any case, when you became an attorney, what was the evolution of your legal career?
Well, I couldn't find a job. In fact, only one in my senior class, graduating class, got a law job. And all the rest of us had to go find something else to do until we could get a law job. And I went to work for State Farm Insurance and became an investigator and an adjuster. And I luckily got my own home territory. So I was in Missoula, but I got to go all the way up to Eureka and Libby and down to Sanders County. It was a perfect job. It was a great job. I just loved it.
And then how did you?
Well, I worked for a year and a half. And when I hired on, it was to a great old fella in St. Paul, and he and I got along, and I just was doing great. Then he got sick and retired, and they hired a young buck. I think he was in Oregon, and he made my life miserable for a whole year. And then all of a sudden, he walked in the office in Missoula one day unannounced and congratulated me. I had graded out the #1 adjuster in his entire area. And so I said, let's go get a beer. And so the second beer, I said, which one of us is going to resign? Because I'm not going to work for you any longer. And he said, well, I'm going to keep the job. Stop by the office, you'll have my letter of resignation. Didn't know what I was going to do, but I wasn't going to work with him. And so then I started going in. I went to a law firm in Missoula for a while. And my dear friend Tony Keast, who was in my class, got to be, as a very young man, a county attorney in Missoula. In Missoula County, and he came to me one day after I'd been maybe a few months with this other law firm, and said, why don't you come half-time with us? I had a guy that was working half-time, and he's gone, and I need some help. And so I talked to my friend in the firm, and he said, why don't you do that? That would help me get started with you. And so I did it, and I liked it really well. I liked that again. And so Tony wanted me to go full-time, so I withdrew from the firm that I was, and I went full-time county attorney, and I stayed there until 1959. And in 1959, Tony got himself in a little trouble, and I didn't want it rubbing off on me. So I went back to Kalispell, where my dad had practiced law, and found a situation that was satisfactory. Stayed there.
And then you ran for the legislature in 1960 to be in the 61
Yes,
session?
that's right.
Yeah.
And re-elected in 63.
Okay, so you served in the 61, 63.
Yes.
When you were in the 61 session, Ted Schwinden was still there.
He was the minority leader.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and Kermit Daniels. They
I
loved
remember
to
Kermit
pick on
from
me.
Deer Lodge, yeah.
Well, they were good guys,
Yeah.
but they were tough politicians.
Yeah.
And of course, I was in the Republican side, and we controlled it.
Yeah.
And so they had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
With
Well,
me and others.
When I had Ted in our last series, he was telling us about his 1959-61 experiences, and then he got bumped and didn't come back until he came when Forrest took over as governor. But that kept his career going and everything else. But he had a lot of reminiscences about the nature of the legislature at that time. So you were there for 2 sessions.
Yes.
And then you just decided it was time to not pursue that
Well,
anymore?
no, I was invited by Babcock and some of the other people, Governor Babcock at that
Right.
time, to run for Attorney General.
Ah.
And I did.
Oh, you ran against Forrest in
did.
'64.
I did, yes.
Ah.
Sadly,
Yeah.
there was an assassination of Kennedy, and Lyndon Johnson went in, and that was a sweep. as
And
you
that changed the
remember.
politics
Oh,
of the time, yeah.
You know, my great friend Alex Brode, who was in the legislature with me, and a wonderful attorney, a beaut
Right.
boy, now in Great Falls in a major firm. He ran against Mike Mansfield, and I ran against Forrest. And on the campaign trail down in Billings one day, ran into Forrest. I said, "How am I doing?" He says, 60-40. Absolutely, the count came out 60-40.
You know, he was a sharp old Paul.
Oh, yeah,
He was, you know.
But he was a part-time attorney general,
Yeah.
and I was offended by that.
Yeah. And
I mean, he had a law firm uptown, and you could get an appointment with him unless you had an appointment with the law firm.
Oh.
And I wanted to change that. We did. From
Yeah.
then on, he didn't do that anymore.
He was that was a classic thing in Montana history when in the old days when the governor could have law clients. So when at the time when W.A. Clark was resigning from the U.S. Senate in shame, they suckered the governor out of state to California to a law case, and while he was gone, the lieutenant governor got all the authority, and he was a friend of Clark, so Clark resigned before they could boot him out of the Senate, and the very next day, with the governor gone, he got reappointed to the position. There's some really interesting history and all
I'm
that
sure
stuff.
it is.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Montana has much interest in history.
Yeah. So you ran, and then you just went back to your law practice. And,
Yes.
But you were a serious player in Republican Party politics, it seems.
Well, in my area, yeah.
Well, you were respected in the organization. You were running for office. You went to conventions. You ended up working with Attorney General Woodall once. He was elected in '68 when Forrest stepped out.
Yes.
Woodall beat Gene Daly.
Right.
And you then worked with Woodall for a while?
Well, yes, I worked with a second session.
Yeah.
First session I was not involved. Second session I was, and that coincided actually with the Con.
Yeah. So now we come to this period of time where all of a sudden, in 1970, the election occurs. It says 65% of the people say we want to have a convention, and here's how the election's going to proceed. That happened with the '71 session, where they laid out the rules that you have regular nominating processes, and so you decided to follow.
Partisan election.
It was partisan, yeah. They had partisan primaries. And remember, Democrats filed Democrat. 525 people filed, tried to get into the Con. That was an amazing high level of interest, and it could not include like legislators couldn't be.
Yes, they brought a court case to eliminate any sitting legislator.
Yeah.
And they were successful with that, and I think that helped.
Well, yeah.
I think that helped with the convention to keep it nonpartisan. I really do.
Yeah, I
That's
think
part of it.
I believe that too. I believe it was a big deal. And furthermore, this is not legislation. This is a constitution that you were putting together. And if you put a bunch of legislators together, it may have been 3 times longer. You know?
Well, we were limited.
Yeah.
You know, we were limited because the funding was only for so many days, and we did it.
Yeah.
That was a miracle.
Yeah, 54 days.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. So, now, what made you decide to run? Once the opportunity was there to be part of the Constitutional Convention.
Well, during the time that I served in the legislature, and during that same time I was city attorney, which was a part-time job in Kalispell for 7 years. It became apparent that people who opposed anything that we tried to change would bring up the constitutional issue. And so there were limitations to government, county, city, state, written in that Constitution because it was written by a group of people who wanted to control the state. And believe me, in my experience, I felt through the lobbyists involved, for Montana Power, Anaconda Company, et cetera, unions and various things, that they knew how to do it and the rest of us didn't, and they were armed and knew better. And that maybe it was time for a change. And during that 7 years that I was city attorney, I directed and worked on recodification of the city ordinances of Kalispell. So I knew something about it, and it intrigued me. And I thought, you know, we got to get the right kind of people to run, because my experience is if you get the best people running, the best candidates win regardless of party, pretty much. And so we got a few up there, and I was a spot, and I took it.
And you had a mixture of Democrats and Republicans from the Flathead, as I recall.
Oh, yeah.
And so all of a sudden you ran, and you made it through the primary, and then you made it through the general, and voila, you go to an organizing session in late November. The election was early
71.
November in 71. It was a special election in 71, and it took place early November. In November 29th, you met in Helena, all the delegates.
Yes.
And their primary mission was to choose someone to be the president.
And the officers.
The officers, yes.
Yeah.
And so we all know Leo was named, but there were also a whole series of officers.
You realize that the largest vote getter was Father Arbanez from Great Falls, and he thought he would automatically be the president. And so the controversy was all on the Democrat side.
Yeah.
And when they ironed that out, and then John Toole, who's a very prominent businessman in Missoula, and one of the leaders of that community behind the scenes, was the vice president, and that's the way it went.
So the organization was just starting to get formed, and you and I talked once before about the process that led to you becoming the rules chair.
Okay,
and
let me explain
so
that.
So go right ahead with.
I think it's the day we completed the election of the officers of the convention, and we adjourned. And I was asked to come up to the front of the arena, the side up there at the House of Representatives, and sit down there with the group. And they were all Republicans and a few independents. And all of a sudden they asked me to come up front and said, "We're going to form a caucus and we'd like to have you be the leader," which was a shock to me. Nobody had ever talked to me about it before. And so I got up, and the only thing I could say is, "What are we going to do?"
Yeah.
And or something to that effect. And there was a little mumbling around here and there. And finally, an independent in the back of the room got up and said, "I think we're premature. I move we adjourn." And it carried.
Yeah.
And so we didn't go any farther. But later that same evening, I'm in a room trying to figure out. I think it was Jim Felt from Billings, who had also been in the legislature and with me.
He was no longer in the legislature, so he could be in the CONCON.
We were
Former Speaker of the House.
No.
He was.
Felt. No,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
Well, he may have been.
in '65 he was.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe in '65.
Yeah.
But '64 was Clyde Hawks and then Hazelbaker.
Yeah.
But that could be. I just know that. And so I went down. I was invited to a room down there to talk about, why do you want a caucus? I thought we were going to try and make this thing nonpartisan, make it work. And they were explaining to me that they thought the Democrats would get control of every committee and everything there was. It would be very difficult to write a good vehicle that it would be partisan in some respects. And that was their concern. And all of a sudden the phone rang, and it was looking for me, and so I got the phone, and it was Leo on the phone. And Leo asked me if he'd come down to room such and such. He said, I want to talk to you. And so I said, sure, heck yes. And I excused myself, and I went down to the room, and Leo was there. And I don't remember who was in the room with me. There were some. I don't know who they were. I can't remember now. It was unimportant to me at the time. And Leo sat down, and we started out, Marshall, why are you here? What do you want to do? And I explained to him that I was here I'm sure just like you were, want to write the best Constitution that I can. I don't have any other motive. And he accepted that. And he said, well, I would like to name you as chairman of the Rules Committee. And I said, well, I would be receptive to that, but I would like to make sure that that's acceptable with the people that, as you know, want to form a caucus or something. He said, well, okay, check it out with them and let me know as soon as you can. And I excused myself. Well, before I did that, I said, I got to go back with there's got to be some give and take. You know, how are we going to do this so we make sure that we don't have a crisis right to the first day on make it partisan and be nonpartisan. So we worked it out that every other committee would be a Democrat chairman, and and the vice chairman would be a Republican, and the same with when the Republicans were chairman, the Democrat would be a vice chairman. But of course, the Democrats having more members would actually control the committee.
Right, overall.
But it was the feeling that
Sure.
because the officers were split like that, everybody would always know what was going on, and there wouldn't be no surprises. So I went back and explained it. The group was very happy. That was more than they thought they could achieve through a caucus. And so they said, well, sure, take that Rules Committee chairmanship and let them know we're happy.
Wow.
We won't form a caucus. And so I did, and Leo said, well, he says, you're going to have to draw the rules. I said, well, wait a minute. I thought I'd just come down and get the rules and go home and study them and come back, you know, and in 72 and get, no, you got to draw the rules. But it will make it easy for you. We've already collected rules from all over the nation that we thought were decent. Plus, we have our own rules for the legislature. And so I went home and looked at them, and they weren't what I wanted. I wanted to see something more current, and hopefully there was one that was successful. And the latest one was in Hawaii. And so I asked for the rules of Hawaii, and they got them to me. And I began to rule those things, and as a result of all of it, I concluded that there were several things that needed to be done, and ended up. I wrote them there and put them in the rules, and we adopted it. And the things that I was concerned about was openness. I wanted everything open so that anybody could come in and be involved. There were no secret meetings. There were no sudden subcommittee meetings or something on a subject and nobody knew about the meeting. Everybody wanted to have input, and the only way you can do that is if you can attend every meeting without, you know, and then we had to have at least a mandatory 3-day notice of any meeting. And so they couldn't have surprises. And of course, we're a people's group. I wanted people all over Montana to be able to get in, so we were publicizing everything. I mean, every notice of every committee meeting and the subject was put out to the public, and they had a chance to do that. And then we had one thing that I thought Hawaii did was absolutely outstanding. They accepted citizen proposals. And by that I mean, when you're in the legislature, somebody would come to you and want a bill. And if you didn't didn't agree with it, you didn't accept it. Well, then they went around and shopped it till they found somebody. And, you know, there's no research done on that stuff. It's suddenly in there, and it wasn't, I didn't like the process because you had to rely on the lobbyists and people that knew things over the years. And I just thought it was better if we just had a citizen proposals, and we had this process I've just notified, notification, everything. And they accepted that. And I thought that was one of the better parts of our rule situation. And we adopted the rules with only a couple little tweaks that I don't even remember what those were now. They're not significant. And
so
got on with it.
That led to the openness of the CONCON.
Yes.
And then ultimately was reflected in the CONCON's openness for the future.
Well, it also was a campaign tool. You know, we opened it to all of you.
Yeah.
If you didn't come in and say something, that's not we weren't soliciting. Come on in. That was the approach we took, and it sold.
Yeah, and if you can legitimately make the point, this was not done behind any closed doors.
Absolutely.
There was no fix for anybody in power to get what they wanted and everything else. So that was really an important aspect of it. Once you got it set up, did the Rules Committee have to do much after that? Do you have any?
Well, it was only a 5-man committee, 5-person committee, and nice people, and we didn't meet too often.
Right.
We had not too much to do.
Okay.
What it led to was confidence between Leo and me. And we had known each other personally, even though our dads had known each other.
Right.
I respected him, and when I checked him out, and obviously he must have respected me from my experience. So we started getting together every now and then, having lunch at the Parrot, which is a little
candy
coffee shop, candy shop down
yeah.
there, and we'd have lunch, and it kind of went this way. We would meet when I felt there was some unusual pressure that he ought to know about, or he felt there was some unusual pressure or something that I ought to know about, or if there was something happened that either needed my approval or his, and just to go ahead and keep working with the thing. And it worked well. It worked well. He and I just had great faith in each other.
That's wonderful.
And then when I'm the floor manager, as chairman of rules, I became the floor manager. And so I had a telephone, and he and I were commuting all the time when things were going on.
Yeah.
You know, Marshal, something's happening, you know, okay.
Yeah. Well, that relationship speaks well of what, the whole camaraderie.
Well, Leo turned out to be a wonderful, nobody could have done the job that Leo did, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because not only were we doing the thing and one of the things, the strength of the committee system. I believed in it. I wanted it done there. I wanted everything ironed out before it came to the floor as much as possible. And Leo exactly wanted that. So we kept the system, the committee system, working well. And I think that may have been the success, part of it.
Yeah. Now, most of the delegates that have appeared with us have talked about the alphabetical seating. Now, when you sat in that November 29th organizational, I believe you were alphabetical.
Well, we were.
But there was a decision to continue that?
Well, it was. But I didn't know how that came about until I had met Alex Blewett, of course, and became very close with him when we ran for office in '64. But I kept in touch with him. And one of the times that I was in touch with him after the convention, I said,
You mean after the
you were
election?
chairman of one of those commissions, the second one.
Right.
And he said, yeah. I said, well, did you guys discuss this alphabetical seating? He said, that was my recommendation. And it never got expressed at the time of the convention. We just did it. We were there and sat that way, and there was a motion
When you
to
came in
approve
the
it.
door, there they were, alphabetical.
They were, just like today.
Yeah. So Dale Harris, who'd been the staff person for Blewett's commission, became the director for the convention and went in there and put them right up again. And so that's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah, well, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Now, I want to explain about Leo's strength. Leo not only handled the organization of the Constitution, but he and the officers, Toole and whatever her name was, the gal that was
Bowman
yeah,
and Dorothy Eck, and
they had to handle the money and the appropriations and the organization of all that, and they did a wonderful job.
yeah.
Wonderful. I was amazed that they could do that so well with all the other duties.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty extraordinary group of people. So you're sitting there in alphabetical order, and you're now taking up the substance, which first went through the committees and hearings and proposals from citizens and proposals from delegates.
Well, and also, Blewitz had hired the people, the staff,
Right.
and they researched things, so we had an absolute Bible of material for everybody.
Yeah.
Each committee had a strength.
Mm-hmm.
So they had the homework done that you didn't have to do that.
Contrast that with the legislature.
Well, nobody had that. You know, if I wanted to find out something and I could talk to a member and they would say, I don't know anything about it, they'd usually refer me to a lobbyist that they had faith in, that had been there many, many sessions. Get the history. What's the history of this? And they tell me.
Yeah. And so it was really quite different. And to that research, I mean, the structured approach Montana took to getting this started through about 5 years of.
Took 5 years.
To do that. That was terrific.
When I spoke yesterday at the convention about that, I think the word was prepared, prepare, and it was set for us. And so the legislature never walks into that, but we did. We walked ready to go. Mm-hmm. The research had been done. The staff had been hired. The officers had been elected. I happened to be sitting on the aisle as floor manager, and we just started from day one in '72.
Mm-hmm. Now you had you told me that you had a particular interest, which was the executive branch.
Yes.
Tell me about your concerns for the executive.
Well, my dad, of course, being involved in the Montana Bar Association for years, knew many of these people and governors, and they always had one complaint, and that is they were taking a beating when somebody didn't like what a commission or a bureau was doing, but they couldn't do anything about it because they appointed the best people they could, and if they didn't do it right, they couldn't get rid of them. It was tough to do that because they were independent. And I thought a better system would be to have the governor control that situation so that he could take the resignations of those people and put it in his desk, and if he didn't like it, they could resign.
Yeah.
You know, and
kind of a strong governor rather than a weak governor
that's
system.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, Montana did. I think it was designed to be that way with the first Constitution. The overlapping, so what you have is a department that was headed by a board, not by a director. And the board would say have 7 members, and the governor got to appoint 1 a year. So it'd be 4 years in before he might have any semblance of control over a board in the department. Yep. And by then he's running for his second term or out.
They may have killed him.
Yeah.
Their approach to problems.
And in the meantime, if there was any crap, he had to take it, but he couldn't control it.
That's right.
So that was a real concern of yours.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
I didn't think that was a good structure, and I thought it ought to be more like, I thought we ought to parallel our Constitution with the United States Constitution. So
well, you and I are on the same wavelength on this because, as I told you, my first job was with the Executive Reorganization Commission of designing that government that was full of directors instead of boards. And we got that done in the '71 session, but it took years to implement.
I'm sure it did.
But the strong governor, the real management control of the government in Montana, which came out of that, I always like to say that if you've got a government that's not functional, the only people that benefit from that are the powerful, because they get along just fine.
They do.
But if you're just a regular citizen, you need a government for some purposes, and if they can't function well, you're out of luck.
That's true.
And
that's the way I felt.
Yeah. So, we're really on the same wavelength on that thing, I'll tell you. You were on the Bill of Rights Committee.
Yes.
Tell me about that committee's work, and then tell me a bit about Wade's.
Well, we were very blessed that Wade DeHood was appointed the chairman of that committee. Wade is a little different person, or was. Sadly, he's dead. But he studied the law. He just knew things. He just he didn't read a novel. He'd read a law book. You know, that's just the way he was built. So he had knowledge about these things, and conservative in his thinking. He believed in people's rights, and he thought that ought to be clearly set forth in the Constitution, so there wasn't any question about it. And he ran that committee very, very well, and did a good job. And we ended up with a marvelous Bill of Rights.
I know he said that the first decision was, we'll take every right that's in the 1889 Constitution and we're going to keep it in there. And then the only thing we're going to do is, we might refine it a little bit, but it's going to be in there. And then the only thing we're going to do is expand and have more rights and more protections, not less. And not so you started with what you had in 1889 and built from there?
Yes, well, I guess that's what we did. I heard Wade say that in your little deal with him. I didn't know that. He didn't say that to me, but he and I got close during the period of time. We didn't have any problems with that stuff at all.
Well, there's more sections, there's more protections in the Montana Constitution for citizens than any constitution in America.
It rightly should be.
Yeah, isn't that? I always tell people, do you realize as a citizen of Montana, you have more protections than any citizen in America?
I think that's true, and I believe it, and I think when they say that we have the best constitution of any state, I don't know that, I haven't done the research, but I think it would be hard to find one better.
Yeah, and the core of a constitution, there's all the elements, you know, the three branches of government and the checks and balances and the other sections and everything else. But the core of a constitution for citizens is in the rights.
That's right.
And that's a remarkable Bill of Rights or Declaration of Rights that we have.
I think with the turmoil going on in the country right now, was a blessing. That we have that strong situation in the Bill of Rights.
Now, let's talk briefly about the camaraderie of the convention. They got the alphabetical seating, the shared responsibility. In the end, every delegate, even those that disagreed with some of the Constitution, went and signed it. And that seemed to be a sign of unity. Tell me about how that evolved, how people started working together.
Well, people were at least on two committees of their choice. I mean, Leo assigned them, but we gave him a list. He asked for a list of your choices, 3 committees that you'd like to be put on. And everybody, except for one delegate, got 1 or 2 of his choices. And so that eased a little pressure. And the other delegate that didn't get on was from Flathead, and he came to me and bitched, and I said, well, I'd be happy to go get you on the committee of your choice. I think I have enough influence with Leo to do that. No, don't you dare. He just wanted to bitch. And so we left him there. But we had some social events where we mixed. We just knowing people. We didn't know them, so as you got to know them, you respected them a little more. You got a little more background, and you became comfortable with people, just like you do in any crowd. There's one other thing that happened that I haven't heard anybody discuss that I thought was significant. I don't know who lined it up, but it was very important, and that was the presence of Rankin, the lady.
Jeanette Rankin.
Jeanette Rankin came in at a time when it was kind of a little something about women and men, and eased all of that. And then the chairman of Common Cause came in when something was going on and eased a little bit of that. And then Charles Lindbergh came in. I spent a half a day with him. Leo assigned me to him, says, take care of him until we get him on. And that really worked well with some people, really. And then the biggest one for controversy was Big Daddy Unruh, the strong speaker of California House of Representatives.
Jesse Unruh.
Yeah, Jesse, right.
Big Daddy,
and he came in and told us, and he just explained it to people. Let's settle people down. And people began to realize that, there are other people out there that have similar problems, and you can resolve them. And so it eased things.
Yeah.
And it was, I haven't heard anybody talk about it, but to me that was a significant thing, and they were timely as they came in.
Yeah.
They came in when there was a little controversy that you needed something to ease the pain,
Yeah.
and they did it. It worked great. And
Yeah.
I applauded Leo for that. I didn't know if he did it, but I told him he must have. And he didn't say anything because it worked well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, you got it done in 54 days.
Yes.
And you had a campaign ahead. Tell, I don't know what your recollections are about the Save the Money, and Jerry Lindorf talked about that recently. It saved 6 days worth of money with hopes of being able to use that to educate, if you will. And immediately there was a stay on that, and you didn't get to use it, and the court eventually said you couldn't. Tell us about that.
Well, I wasn't involved in that part of it particularly, but we were such limited funds, and the only thing we could do was put out a bulletin that we mailed.
Yeah.
And it was a nice brochure, it was a bulletin. But the biggest thing about the campaign is that suddenly the people with interest were no
came out of the
longer
woodwork.
interested.
Yeah.
No. And the delegates took it on.
Yeah.
And we just campaigned to beat the band. And, on our area, many, many appearances, television, radio, in-person groups. Anytime we could get a group together, we tried to sell it. And I think that was important. And then, of course, we had the election, and we won. And then they wanted to do away. They wanted to claim the election was bad and therefore undo it. And we won that in the Supreme Court, 3-2 of Montana.
Now you were one of the.
I argued that.
You argued that.
Part of that. Part of drafting the briefing.
You and Jerry worked on that.
I don't know who it was now, but there was a committee of us that did it. And we, I think Jim Garlington, an outstanding lawyer, and Wade, and there's Charles Davis did.
Carl,
some of us got together in committee because, we just did it, and won it to the Supreme Court, and then they appealed. The other side appealed
to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and what was interesting was I'm with the Attorney General's office at that time as the special assistant. And because I'd been in the Constitutional Convention and had argued the case, Woodall assigned me the task of handling the Supreme Court case. And so I'm back with Howdy Murphy, my dear friend, also with the Attorney General's office as a special assistant. Woodall gave us the two of us to handle that case. And we were back and were sworn in 1973. I don't know the exact date now, but I have a certificate on the wall of my admission to the Supreme Court. And we called Woodall and said, well, Howdy and I are now eligible to practice before the Supreme Court of the United States, and we'll do her. He says, you don't have to. Why? We won by per curiam opinion, which means that they supported the Montana Supreme Court decision, and we never.
They refused. They said we're not even going to do it.
That's right. They just read it and said no. So
hey,
we were free to go.
You could take credit for the fastest case in the West.
One of the best. Didn't think of it that way. I was.
They heard you were coming, and they said, "Let's take care of this."
We knew they knew we were there.
Yeah.
But it was a sweet and sour situation.
Yeah.
Sweet that we won. Great for the people of Montana and the delegates. Sour that I didn't get a chance to argue before the Supreme Court. I've never had an opportunity.
Oh gosh almighty. Well, there you were. We had the thing done. And what had happened after the election, it appeared to me that 65% of the people on 2-1 voted to have a convention. Generally, the people knew there had to be changes and improvements, and they felt it should be done. And then as it moved forward, specificity takes over. You're drafting a document, and opposition surfaces, and suddenly the vote is held, and the margin is 2,500 votes. It appeared to me that people started opposing it, like the rural interests.
Well, the biggies.
Yeah.
They had the money,
Yeah.
and they campaigned while we were doing our own.
You were knocking on doors and they were putting stuff on TV.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
but we won.
you know, it's really interesting because the Constitution basically shifted power in Montana too. It shifted power more to the people, more concerns for the people, and some of the special interest stuff that was in the old Constitution went away, and so there was opposition to that. So it was kind of a victory for the people of Montana.
It was, yeah.
You know, it's kind of an amazing story. So but you handled the initial case. That was 3-2.
Yes.
That was pretty dicey.
Well, my dad, president of the Montana Bar Association, and he's got me over there because he isn't feeling good, and I drove most of the way over because he wanted me to, and I'm going into my junior year of high school at that time. He takes me down to his banquet, his banquet that he's putting on as the president of the bar. And walk in the room, there's hardly anybody there, but there's two nice, tall, young fellows over there. One of them is Mike Mansfield, and the other one is John C. Harrison. And I didn't know them, but we became friends. They took care of me at the convention, and later on, of course, we knew each other. And John and I became about as good of friends as he and my dad had been.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that, but that's the way it came out.
John was a terrific guy.
Well, and he was the swing vote.
Yeah. So, but they heard the case, and
yeah.
there's a lot of rumors that initially they might have been tilting against it, but it didn't happen that way. Rumors.
I didn't say that I went to Johnsy, and I didn't, but I have to believe personally that the friendship meant something to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
He had handled a case for me as I was city attorney. It was appealed, and where people had bought a house right next to a youth sports complex that was noisy, but they bought it, and then they sued to close it down because it was too noisy.
Yeah.
And this is one of those go to the problem and then try and solve it after you get there, instead of just staying away like they should have. And John was the swing vote in that case too. We lost it in the trial court because we got a judge from Helen over there that turned out that he ruled against us because he didn't like Little League baseball. He had a house up on a hill, and the park was below him, and he was annoyed by the noise. It wasn't, it was kind of sad. Well, John reversed it, and he wrote a Casey to the bat type thing and put it in the decision. It was just outstanding.
Yeah.
And I think that he really liked the people and wanted to do what was right.
Yeah. Well, my experience in knowing John was he was such a gentleman, and
My second marriage was before him in the new Supreme Court chambers.
oh, really? Oh,
Yes,
that's really cool.
yes.
Yeah, I was in a Kiwanis club with him,
Oh,
and years and years and years ago, and he was a real prince of a man.
yes, he was.
And it was an interesting thing. Now, in those days, you could read the court in a way that the two older justices on the court had been there for a long time, which is James T. Harrison, the chief, and Wesley Castles. And they had a record of pretty much ruling on the conservative side or the pro-business side, or that was always what you could almost assume. And then the other two were Haswell and Daley, and Daley was a new one appointed by Forrest, and though Haswell was appointed, they were maybe a little bit more progressive, if you could look at those two.
Frank Haswell was the best trial judge I ever appeared before. He was in Flathead County for years, and a friend of mine.
Yeah, and so there you had maybe a automatic 2-2.
Well, that's what we thought.
Yeah.
That's what we thought. We thought it would be 3-2, but we didn't know how it would swing.
Yeah.
Now, I knew Wesley Castles very well when I was a deputy county attorney in Missoula County. He was from up the road at Superior Country someplace, and he'd always stop by and we'd get a chance to visit. And James T. Harrison, sort of the same way, although visitation was the other way. And I knew his son well, and his son practiced with
Tom, yeah.
with Jerry Lendorf.
Yeah, yeah. Tom was on the Executive Reorganization Commission. In
Yes,
fact,
yes.
he's the last remaining member of that still alive.
I'll be darned.
And I had him at this table when we did the Crucible of Change series. So I got to know Tom. Again, you know, all Montana is a small town with really long streets.
Oh, boy.
We all know each other, it seems.
That's right.
It pays dividends in a lot
It
of
does.
ways. Is there anybody in the Constitutional Convention as delegates who stand out in your memory that you think about and you have about how they impacted things or whatever?
Well, there were some outstanding lawyers,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew them better than others.
Right.
Jim Garlington
Mm-hmm.
quietly influenced things because he was so respected.
Mm-hmm.
Not publicly, but he gave a wonderful speech as we were closing down about the greatest gift
Mm-hmm.
to the children of Montana in the future, and it spoke for him. Then there were others. Wade, of course, was an outstanding lawyer, and Jim Felt, tax-wise, knew a lot of things, and Carl Davis was a great lawyer in Dillon. And so we were all over the state, and most of them, other than Wade, quietly did influence people.
Yeah,
Because
you would
people
never
go
talk
to-
about Wade doing it quietly.
Yeah, well, no, he doesn't do anything quietly. He never did. And that's fine. He was successful. What the other people did was they were there when people would go to them and ask questions,
Mm-hmm.
give an answer. And they all would go to Jim, and they would go to various people that I've named and come to me, as chairman of rules, and they want advice. What am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about that? And we would, we would help them. That's quiet influence. That's not
Sure.
debate.
Tell me about your reflections on suddenly, after having the 71 legislature have 2 women in it out of 156 legislators at that time. Suddenly 19 of the 100 were women. Tell me about the women delegates and your reflections on
Well, a little background. My dad always thought that it was important to involve women in things, and he was on a school board with some women, and he was always able to talk to them and get their opinions and get their decisions and have him vote with him. It was sometimes just a stubbornness. They would listen. That's one thing. Then I'm going after college and down there at Kalispell, and I'm a great sports nut, and although I only play football, and was in a group that was called the Braves Bench, and we supported athletics. We went out and timed all track meets and various things. As a group of us did it all the time. He always had a staff to do it, so we called on, so we just went down and did it. And we would, a group of us put a new floor in at the gymnasium when it needed it, and we had some influence. And then they wanted, the guy was, coach was in track and things, they wanted to start women. And so we said, let's do it. Let's get them involved. So we started the girls' approach in sports in the state of Montana.
Cool.
And I always thought that was wonderful.
Yeah.
And I don't have any problem. I just never had a problem with it. I thought their influence was wonderful. And they listened, and they didn't, nobody was ever acrimonious, nobody was upset about it. I thought they played an important role.
Well, they seem to, have a lot. 9 of the 19 had been members of the League of Women Voters who clearly had studied the issues.
Yes.
They
They were a little liberal for me, but
Yeah.
but nevertheless they knew it and they would listen. And I just never had that support. And I thought it was nice.
Yeah.
And of course we had some great people. Betty Babcock was in there,
Right.
Lucille Spear from Missoula, and some of those people were great community people. And I thought that was fine. I thought some of them were better than a few of the other side.
Yeah. Yeah.
A few men that did not participate very well.
Yes, I heard a group saying that when it came time to promoting the Constitution, they were thinking about how we're going to develop a plan, and they said we turned around and the women had already laid it all out. They were ahead of the men and ahead of the curve on that.
I didn't know that, but
Yeah.
I would suspect that's probably true.
You know, the Dorothy X, the Daphne Bugbees were very interesting folks, but so too there were a lot of salt of the earth, really good, strong women from rural Montana that were
Yes, they were
there. You know, I think of Rachel Mansfield
Yep.
had a terrific history, and well, virtually everybody did. It was a really citizens' effort. Tell me about just basically. We'll be wrapping up here pretty quick. Again, not having legislators there, you felt you reached the grassroots of Montana.
Well, I did, and we didn't. Once we got by the crisis, no caucus.
Yeah.
Then it was a matter of kind of keeping it going, and Leo and I individually with others would exercise a little influence to do that when we saw something was going on, and it was well, I don't know. I just think it worked out.
Yeah. Well, in rural Montana, voted mostly against it, and urban Montana voted mostly for it, and I always thought that was at least a product of reapportionment had happened, and it was a real jolt for rural Montana, and it was a change, and change is tough, and everything else. Well, Marshall, we have reached the end of our wonderful program, and this has been extraordinarily interesting.
Thank
and
you.
it'll really contribute to the knowledge about the Constitution.
Thank you.
So, well, thank you for
I'm
being
glad
here.
to be here.
And for all of you that are watching our series, we ask you to continue to look in as we talk to the delegates, the research analysts, the staff, the people that influence putting this together. Remember, this is the 50th anniversary of the best Constitution in the nation. Montana has a lot to be proud about with it, and part of our effort is to help you understand it even better. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.